The Blizzard make a statement. A true difference maker arrives on scene in the jungle, and as much as things change, they stay the same. All that hits now on the Junior Beast Pod. Let's roll.
That's Klucha, and he goes short side low.
The Rebels are right back in it. All alone, he's stopped by Luke West. And Kerr,
What?
7 seconds is all it took for Kerr.
Quick shot scores. Jacob Goudreau.
Takes a shot and buries that.
So with week 7 in the books, Keenan, plenty to talk about here as teams continue to make moves. There was a bunch of action across the weekend that began on Friday and rolled in through Sunday evening. So with that, why don't you take us through the score recap as we concluded May?
Absolutely. A 14-game docket this past weekend in the Junior B Tier 1 division. Starting on Friday, Warriors knocking the Outlaws out 13-3. Rebels dominating the Crude after being down pretty early in that game, a 10-9 victory over them in overtime. The SWAT rolling into town, taking out the Rockies 26-5. Mounties and the Chill go at it at Brentwood, and the Chill come out on top 11-5. Mavericks and Rampage taking it 11-2. Moving into Saturday, the Blizz with a pair of games, taking them both 15-5 over the Rockies and 13-12 over the Marauders. Shamrocks taking out the SWAT 17-2, and the Silvertips squeaking out a tight one 6-5 over the Mavericks. Into Sunday, the Rebels knock off the Outlaws 11-6. The Blizzard continue their dominance, stomping through the South with a 12-7 victory, handing the Shamrocks their first loss of the year. The SWAT knocked off 10-12 by the Marauders. Silvertips and Mounties go to overtime. Silvertips come out on top 11-10, and the Rampage 10-7 over the Chill.
Thank you, Keenan, for that recap. And so now let's go, and we'll start in the South here as the Shamrocks get knocked off for the first time this season. The Blizzard able to take them down by a score of 12-7. And it was Xander Delaronde with a hat trick, Wiley also adding a hat trick as they pull the upset. And the Blizzard have been known to do this. I mean, this isn't a huge shock. They're typically a team that causes a lot of havoc through the regular season and through the Larry Bishop. Haven't been able to put it together at the Founders for whatever reason, but they're always in the mix. And for me, they're really starting to make a move. I think that they have probably as many or more quality wins. If you look at their schedule, like they've beaten the Silvertips now, they've beaten the Shamrocks, and they've beaten the Kings. So I think that says something. The Shamrocks, meanwhile, they definitely have, I think, some things to sort out. They've hit a little bit of a bump in the road here. They've played a pretty soft schedule if you really look at it. I think they're showing some vulnerabilities, but I think if you would ask that coaching staff, I think Jason Crook would be the first one to say that adversity is welcome at this time of the year. I think you want some of that. I think maybe some complacency is set in there. And so this is probably the perfect time midway through the regular season for them to hit some of that. They did thump the Saskatchewan SWAT, as you said, on Saturday, but they run into trouble with Winnipeg on Sunday. Meanwhile, in the South, the Mountaineers have been going through a rough patch in their schedule, playing a lot of road games. And I think they're in a situation right now where they're just going to have to clean up the first couple of periods of their game. They're coming back a lot in games. I know when they were up here over the weekend, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, they just looked kind of disjointed. A lot of bad passes and unforced turnovers, which is atypical of that team. They're usually pretty buttoned up. So I think that, now with a lot more home games coming up, they might be able to get back on track. And I think that's the best news for them right now, is that their division isn't all that great, and they've got a bunch of home games on the horizon. Meanwhile, the Marauders, they also suffered a loss to the Blizzard. They were actually leading the Blizzard late in the game, and the Blizzard scored a couple of goals in the final 90 seconds to tie and win the game. And the Marauders, continue to sort of win one, lose one. They sit at 500, 5-5. So that's the South. Anything to add there?
Yeah, mainly on the topic of the Mounties, like you were saying, is that they just need to clean up their first periods. And like you look at their remaining schedule with half of it left, 10 games, they got 7 home in those last 10. So a good chance to make yourself known on home ground. Good news for them. And as painful as it is to might say it, their next game is Friday against the Rockies. So, I mean, we know the Rockies haven't been nearly what they've hoped for the last few seasons. But teams seem to kind of take advantage of that and, swing it in their direction when things aren't going so hot. So, maybe that will be a good comeback for the Mounties to start building something in the second half of the season.
Yeah, they're gonna have to make a move if they want to have home floor advantage with their series against the Marauders. Obviously, that series you could see coming right from the get-go here in 2024. Now let's shift over to the East, and this will be quick because when we're talking about the South, all we had to talk about was really the blizzard. The Kings were off this weekend. Well, actually, I think they played Prince Albert in to start their series for the Founders, but that's a different story. We'll leave that for another day. But the Blizzard do come into Calgary and get a sweep. And so they now are putting pressure on the Kings for first place. And as I said, they have some big time wins now. They've beaten the Silvertips, the Shamrocks, and the Kings. They go on the road here this past weekend, couple of impressive wins. And they've got the usual suspects stepping up for them. I think that they're usually a team that can get into double digits on the offensive side of things, production wise, and that puts a lot of pressure on opponents. I think they're a team that is going to be dangerous moving forward, and I think they've shown to be maybe the team in the East now with the Kings they continue to show the Kings they have offense. The question is, can they keep the ball out of the net? And so that'll be something that when those two teams go head to head moving forward, and almost certainly in the Eastern final, that'll be something to watch. Is really a really contrasting styles go head to head there. Now let's go over to the Central, where I want to thank Red Deer for stepping up to the plate for me after I ranted and raved about them last week. I know they had that game on, I think it was Friday night against the Mavericks, and I was thinking to myself, when I'll watch them go out and lose like 9-4 or something like that. But the opposite took place. They were able to go out and get a solid 11-2 win, basically a real statement win for them after they had dropped their first meeting, I believe, against the Mavericks. And so they pull up closer to them and for second place in the Central. They also get a big 10-7 win at home against the Chill on Sunday. And Tisdale continues to be a real problem for opposing teams. And Keenen, at this point, I think it's pretty safe to say he's a top 5 guy in the league. And if Red Deer doesn't end up going to the Founders, he'd seriously be a guy I would look at picking up to go to the national championship. Obviously, that's well down the road, but I just think he's that type of player. I think he's so much improved from what I saw last year. So a little bit of a shout out to Isaac Tisdale down in Red Deer. Now, the Chill, I just mentioned, they did lose to Red Deer on Sunday in a pretty tight game. They did get an 11-5 win the day prior against the Mountaineers. That game actually might have been Friday night. I don't remember.
Correct,
But
Friday night.
It was Friday night. Okay, so they get that Friday night win against the Mountaineers, and they sit at 3-6, but yet they have a +8 goal differential. And at this point, it looks like it just seems to me like I haven't seen a ton of Central games, but really none. I've just seen a couple of them come play up here. But at this point, Keenen, it looks like the Chill are going to be in a dogfight with Mountain View for that last playoff spot. I expect at least Red Deer to continue to ascend, and the Silvertips are just too far ahead of everybody else to fall out. So I really think that they're going to be in tough with Mountain View for that last playoff spot. Both teams deserving of a spot. I think in any other division, those two teams would probably be second in, honestly. But nonetheless, one of them's going to miss the playoffs, and the Chill have a huge 3-game set coming up in Winnipeg this weekend, and they're going to need those games like water, to be honest. I mean, I think they're going to need to probably win 2 of the 3, and that'll go a long way in making sure they're able to climb into playoff contention. Any thoughts in the Central, Keenan?
Yeah, the Central Division is honestly, I think, one of the tightest divisions we've seen in years in the RMLL. You're looking at a 5-point differential between second, third, and fourth. The Rampage and Chill both have 1 game in hand on the Mavericks. So, I mean, you give the Rampage that win, and that shoots them into second. I think this game or this season is going to come down to the wire in the Central. And I think you're right. If the Chill have any chance of making the playoffs, this road trip against the Blizzard is going to be, if they do end up taking 2 of the 3 and making the playoffs, they're going to thank this road trip 100% for them making the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a huge section of their schedule here. And I think something important to point out here is that the Silvertips are hosting. So that means that a second Central team is going to get in, meaning that you only really have to win 1 series in the 2-3 spot. So whether it ends up being Rampage Chill or Rampage Mavericks, or hey, it could still be Mavericks Chill. If it ends up being, whatever the matchup is, that's going to be for a spot in the provincials. So that makes that race for that final playoff spot that much more important and that much more appealing, I think, for those teams trying to make something of their season here. And all 4 of them have the potential to do so. And I think it's also, before I move on here, I think it's also important to note that the Silvertips have shown some vulnerability. I mean, they just squeaked out a couple of wins this past weekend, both by 1 goal. And I think just from watching some of the film of their games, teams have sort of figured out how to score on McDonough. There's one spot in particular that I'm not going to say what it is, but it's there. So it's something I've seen over and over. So, and it's going to be interesting to see if he's able to adjust. Some goaltenders just can't. And that's something to watch for across the league. If McDonough can sort out his issues, because they're going to need him to be one of the better goaltenders in the league. Because from what I can tell, I haven't seen them live, but they're a bit of a smaller team. And so in saying that, you can't access the middle of the floor on them. You can get over the top and get into quality shooting lanes. And so we'll see how things play out in the Central, but again, it's going to be fascinating because all 4 of those teams are legitimate playoff contenders. Now, finally, let's go over to the North, where there's actually a lot to talk about here, Keenan. And I'm going to start with that Friday night game, the Crude and the Rebels. The Crude were up in that game 5-1 after the first, 9-7 relatively late in the game. And the Rebels come back, win in overtime on a Seth McKenzie marker. And that's just a debilitating loss for the Crude. They ran into some real penalty trouble late in the game. Their AP Belichick takes a 5-minute penalty, which I heard was questionable. I wasn't in the arena, but I heard it was questionable. But nonetheless, I mean, that's just terrible loss for the Crude. It's just something you can't afford to have. But I mean, let's swing this the other way though for a second here, and I want to talk about Carter McAdam. Guy goes off his first 2 games in the jungle, 4 goals, 9 assists, 13 points in 2 games. He, of course, also played in that 11-6 win on Sunday against the Outlaws. And, this is a kid who was let go by the minors. And I believe, I pretty strongly believe that he should still be there, but that's a different story. He is able to come down to the Rebels. And, I think it's a testament to who he is as a kid and as a person. I mean, it didn't seem to faze him. He comes down and absolutely shreds for the Rebels, as I just touched on. And this is a kid that I know pretty well, Keenan. I coached him in Bantamay a handful of years ago. Probably one of the most coachable, smartest players that I've ever had the fortune of being around. Um, I've never seen a guy pick off passes like he does. Just get in shooting lanes. Like, and he was more of a defensive kind of guy in minor lacrosse. He could also contribute offensively, but he wasn't a finisher. Like you could ask his dad that he would just fire the ball into the goalie's stick. But um, clearly he's figured that side of the game out. And he's just having a ton of success. Great family, great kid. And really happy to see that. And I think that's a huge addition for the Rebels as they move forward. Now, the Warriors, I think they've gone through quite a bit here early season. A lot of movement in their lineup. I think they're finally starting to kind of gain some traction and understanding of who they're going to have in the fold. And they've played Keenen, I think, the majority of their games with 16 runners and 3 of those being affiliates. And it's really pretty ridiculous that they're 5-2-1. I mean, they've pulled out 1-goal wins against the Crew, the Mountaineers, the Rampage. They have that draw against the Rebels. They just continue. I think they're living right now off of just that sheer belief in themselves, just expecting to win. And I think that's coming through for them in clutch moments. And I also want to point out Josh Dewart is just showing up big time for them now at 32 points in 6 games. He's another kid who's been through a lot, and he's been a real catalyst for them. He's just playing with so much more confidence, and he's been stepping up in those big key moments alongside Luke Royer. And, now that they get Dickin back, I think that offense is starting to hit its stride. Liam Elliott, another dangerous righty, is about to make his return. So as they continue to get healthy and sort of figure out who they are and get some chemistry going, they're looking like they're going to be right there, back up there at the top of the standings, competing to go to the Founders once again.
There's only one thing that I think concerns me about the Warriors, and it's looking at their record. They have only ever won at home. All of their wins are at home. They don't have a single win on the road yet. And I think if you're going to make your way to the Founders, you've got to find a way to get those wins. Even like that 7-7 draw against the Rebels a couple weeks ago. You got to find a way to just push past if you want to make it back to the Founders again. And they're on a road trip also out east against the Kings for a 3-game set this weekend. And I think that, similar to how the Chill have that 3-game set against the Blizzard, this will be an ultimate test for the Warriors, especially if they want to top the North again.
Yeah, and I mean, I know like last year, if you would have looked at it, I think what did they finish? Something like 16-4, something like that.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and they were 10-0 at home, so they were 6-4 on the road, right? So that's with a full complement of players. And you even look at their playoff run. I mean, they only really had the one series, right? And they were 2-1, and they lost. The one game they lost was on the road. So there's no question they're more vulnerable on the road. I think they're very comfortable in Bill Hunter. But the good news is for them is that they're likely going to finish first, and they're likely going to then get the bye, and they're likely going to have 2 of the 3 games at home. So their path to the Larry Bishop is pretty clear. Whether or not it's going to be up to one of these other 3 teams in the North to kind of figure themselves out, because there's a lot of inconsistency right now amongst those 3 teams, a lot of issues to sort out. And so we'll see. I think whoever's the quickest to kind of find themselves, and whoever's maybe the healthiest come playoff time. I mean, obviously you got to make it. One of them's not. But at the end of the day, I think it's the Warriors to lose, and we'll see what happens. But you're right. I mean, they are more vulnerable on the road. There's no question about it. I would say this year, though, I mean, if you look at it, they've only played 3 road games.
True.
And their road games have been mostly, I mean, their road games have all been tougher. Like they had the Silvertips on the road, and they had the Rebels, and they had the Chill. So, I mean, and they went to Calgary with like 15 guys. I mean, I could have told you that they were probably losing those games. So
Fair enough.
Nothing too surprising in Warrior Land, but we'll see. I mean, you're right. They're going to Regina this weekend. for 3 games, and I'm going to be really interested to see what happens because they're short again. So it's just the reality of it, and we'll see how it plays out. But for now, that is the division recap for week 7. Now I want to just touch on a little side issue, or not even an issue, just like a little gripe I have. I'm looking at the RML site, and I look at the standings, and it's displaying the Rebels as being in first place at 5-4-1, and the Warriors in second at 5-2-1. And I've seen this before. Like, I think the GLC site does this. There's something with the programming of these sites that just needs to be sorted out. But they always put the team that's played more games above, when in reality it's points percentage, and the team playing less games should be ahead. So that's just something I wanted to mention. I don't know if we can get that fixed, but it drives me, like, I don't know if a lot of people are like this. Just me personally, like when I click it and I see it, it just bugs me. It's just, I'm OCD, so whatever. But
Get on
it
that
is.
soapbox.
Yeah, it is what it is. But like, I just, something that I'd like to see get fixed, and I know there's others that I'm sure would say the same. But with that, let's finish this off here, Keenan, with some power rankings. So at 5, I have the Blizzard sliding in here. As I mentioned, some real quality wins for them. I think I would say probably the most in the league, if not, I would say probably the most in the league. Maybe there might be a couple other teams with 3, but at this point in the season, having 3 win against teams that are well above 500, I think is meaningful. And as I said, I need to see the Kings kind of figure themselves out defensively and start limiting goals a little bit better. At 4, the Rampage. They continue to impress. They had 2 big wins over the weekend. They're going to stay at 4. The Silver Tips, as I was also talking about earlier, they're going to fall to 3. I have the Warriors moving past them at 2. The reason for that mainly is just the fact that the Warriors are starting to get their team intact. They're looking a bit better. Their offense is starting to look like it's up amongst the elite of the league again. And the Silver Tips, I just have some questions right now, and I want to see them start to maybe clean a few things up, and they're going to need better goaltending. At number 1, I'm going to leave the Shamrocks where they are. No reason to move them down as of yet. They play the Warriors in a huge matchup in about 10 days, and that's going to tell us a lot, I think, about where those 2 teams are and sort of where the big boys sit. But for now, the Shamrocks will stay at 1. You got anything different there, Keenan?
No, I think I'm in full agreement with your top 5. I definitely agree. There's nothing to worry about with the Shamrocks yet. I mean, you're bound to lose at least 1 over the course of the season. And I mean, at that, it was only by 5, so no need to panic yet. But yeah, no, I am in full agreement with your top 5. Also moving into performers of the week. Not for an individual this week though. I actually just want to shout out the back gates. In the Mountain View Mavericks and Rocky View Silvertips game, that 6-5 victory for the Silvertips. The backgates absolutely shone in that game, being only 11 goals scored total. And most of those goals all came in the third period with a 4-1 lead for the Silvertips and scoring in the third. Yeah, just kudos there. Just working the ball, keeping the guys out of scoring opportunities and keeping the scoring lanes shut down. So, yeah, that performer of the week is just the back gates for the Mavs and the Silvertips.
Right on, Keenan. Now I can't argue there. I mean, every once in a while too, yeah, it's important to shout out the back door and to give some of those guys a nod, and especially like, I mean, I'm sure you would love to give it to a couple of individuals, but at the end of the day, being in the arena and things like that, that makes it pretty difficult. So I think that's a reasonable way to go about it.
Looking forward into week number 7 of action here on Crowlax TV, kicking off with a Thursday night matchup between the Crude and the Rebels. That game 8 p.m. at the Moyer Recreation Center. On Friday, 2 games on the docket. Senior B, the Knights visiting the Rebels, 8 p.m. at Moyer Recreation Center. And at the same time on Friday, 8 p.m. at the Stupapart Arena, the Okotoks Marauders visiting the Calgary Shamrocks. That game is bound to be a good one. Moving into Saturday, the Riot visiting the Saints in Alberta Major Female. Saturday, 2:30 p.m. at Bill Hunter Arena. Also Saturday, the Knights then heading down to Beaumont for a 3 p.m. matchup against the Outlaws of Ken Nickel Regional Recreation Center. And also 3 p.m. on Saturday, Plainsman Arena, the St. Albert Crude taking a trip down south to Airdrie, visiting the Rocky View Silvertips. And Sunday, 2 games back-to-back, Rampage visiting the Rebels at 1 p.m. and the Senior B Outlaws and Senior B Rebels at 4 p.m. Those games at the Moya Recreation Center. Back to you, Mo.
Thanks for that. So now I want to just remind everybody to make sure that you hit subscribe on all the videos. I want to encourage people to comment during games in the live chat, in the comments section underneath, after games have gone live. Just throw in any thoughts that you have, talk about the games, what you're seeing, what you're thinking. And feel free. I mean, especially encourage interaction, with my accounts. Like, if you have anything to say at all, like, hit me up, MJ_9 on X, m.joma on Instagram. Feel like, go off. Like, if you hear something you don't like, or like you want to have a debate about something, like, I encourage all of it. So that's all there for everyone. We hope that you're enjoying the games, and I think as we move past the initial stages of the season, I think the technical quality is definitely on the up, and it's only going to continue to get better. So we appreciate everybody tuning in. And again, if you want to get in contact, MJ_9 on X, m.joma on Instagram. We hope to hear from you guys, and that'll be it for the week.
And also be sure to follow Crowlax TV on all your social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, and X at Crowlax TV, anywhere that you can get your socials. Well, thank you once again for joining us on the Junior Beast podcast for my co-host, Muhammad. My name is Keenan. Thank you for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next week.
Fire it up.